The air at Overwatch Base K7 was a tangible thing, a gritty mixture of silica dust and vaporized jet fuel that coated the tongue and settled deep in the lungs. When the transport ramp lowered, it was this air that greeted Anya Sharma first, a familiar, unwelcome handshake. She stepped out onto the shimmering tarmac, a single duffel bag slung over a shoulder that seemed too slight for the weight. The sun was a merciless hammer in the sky, beating down on the prefabricated structures and the heat-hazed mountains on the horizon. A few mechanics, their faces slick with sweat and grease, glanced up from their work on a sleek, next-generation drone. They saw a woman of indeterminate age, her face impassive, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. They saw the standard-issue fatigues that seemed a size too large, the worn-out boots, and the way she moved without hurry, without wasted motion. Their eyes registered her, cataloged her as non-essential, and slid away. She was just another administrative transfer, a paper pusher sent from the Corps to this forgotten outpost on the edge of nowhere. Her presence was a clerical footnote, nothing more. She walked toward the command building, her shadow a stark, lonely shape on the cracked concrete. The silence that followed her was not one of respect, but of profound indifference. She was invisible, a ghost before her time. Her file had preceded her, of course. A thin, heavily redacted document that listed her designation as Records and Logistics Liaison. It was a title designed to inspire exactly this kind of apathy. It spoke of spreadsheets and supply chain management, of a career spent behind a desk, far from the sharp end of the spear. There was no mention of past deployments, no commendations, no hint of a life lived beyond the sterile confines of a database. To the hardened personnel of K7, she was a bureaucratic ghost, a placeholder in a system that valued tangible strength and proven lethality above all else. They saw a soft civilian in a uniform, and in this place, that was a creature to be pitted, then ignored. Colonel Madsen did not get up when she entered his office. He was a man carved from the rock of the surrounding mountains, his face a roadmap of desert campaigns and ingrained skepticism. He gestured to the uncomfortable chair opposite his desk, a metal relic that screeched in protest. "Sharma," he said, his voice the sound of gravel grinding together. He didn't look at her file on his screen. He looked through her. "Welcome to the end of the line. Your file is concise." The word hung in the air, thick with insinuation. It meant empty. It meant unimpressive. "My CO told me Central was sending a liaison to facilitate interdepartmental data cohesion. Sounds like a solution in search of a problem." Anya said nothing. She simply sat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her stillness seemed to irritate him. He wanted a reaction, nervousness, a defensive justification, anything to confirm his assessment. He got only quiet patience. "Look," he sighed, finally leaning forward, his forearms resting on a stack of threat assessment reports. "I run a forward operating base, not a library. My people are operators, not clerks. We have a system that works. It's loud, it's messy, and it keeps us alive. I don't need anyone to facilitate my data. What I need are more drone pilots and munitions. What are you actually here to do?" His tone was openly condescending, the kind of superior uses when he believes he is speaking to an intellectual inferior. A younger lieutenant standing by the door shifted his weight, a flicker of second-hand embarrassment on his face. He felt the institutional arrogance in the room like a pressure change. Anya finally met the colonel's gaze. Her eyes were a deep, steady brown, and for a fleeting moment, he felt an unnerving sense of being weighed and measured himself. "I'm here to observe and assist where needed, Colonel," she said. Her voice was low, even betraying no emotion. "I will stay out of your way." Madsen snorted, a short, sharp burst of derision. "See that you do." He waved a dismissive hand. "Lieutenant Kalin will show you to your quarters. Find a dusty corner and try not to touch anything important." She did not go to her quarters. Lieutenant Kalin, a young man whose posture was a mixture of military stiffness and youthful uncertainty, pointed the way, but Anya gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I'll get settled later," she said. "I'd like to see the base." He was about to argue, to insist on following the colonel's orders, but something in her quiet authority stopped him. He just nodded and retreated, feeling strangely like he was the one who had been dismissed. Anya walked. She moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, her senses absorbing the environment. She noted the blind spots in the perimeter fence's camera coverage, the inefficient placement of the secondary generator, the way the prevailing wind carried sand into the primary air intake for the server farm. Her eyes were not the eyes of Clerk. They were the eyes of a predator assessing new territory. Her path eventually led her to a hangar at the far end of the tarmac, away from the sleek, modern aircraft. Inside, shrouded in dust and neglect, sat a relic. It was an old C-137 Stratoliner, a modified transport from a bygone era, its four massive engines silent for what looked like a decade. It was a metal carcass, a monument to forgotten technology. The mechanics called it the Ghost. Most of the younger personnel didn't even know what it was. To them, it was just a piece of junk taking up space. Anya stopped at the hangar door, her gaze fixed on the derelict plane. She ran a hand along the dusty fuselage, her touch gentle, reverent. Her fingers traced the faint outline of a painted insignia, long since faded, of a bird with a key in its talons. She walked around to the cockpit stairs, which were still lowered, and climbed inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old leather and cold electronics. She settled into the pilot's seat, her hands finding the controls with an unnerving familiarity, her fingers tracing the worn grooves in the yoke. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't in a junkyard. She was 30,000 feet above a hostile ocean, the hum of the engines a living thing beneath her, the world a canvas of darkness and light. A memory, sharp and vivid, flashed behind her eyelids. Then it was gone. As she sat there, lost in thought, the sleeve of her fatigues rode up her arm, revealing a faint tattoo on the inside of her wrist. It wasn't a flamboyant design. It was a small, precise geometric pattern, a series of interlocking circles and lines that looked almost like a circuit diagram. It was a symbol with no obvious meaning, easily overlooked. To anyone who saw it, it would be a curious, forgotten piece of ink. But to a very small, very select group of people, most of them dead, it was a sign of allegiance to the most elite and secret unit that had ever existed. The sky began to change in the late afternoon. The clear, brutal blue turned to sickly yellow-brown at the horizon. The wind, once just a hot breath, began to pick up a keening, abrasive edge. The veterans on the base recognized the signs instantly. A hubbub, not just a sandstorm, but a moving wall of sand and fury, a force of nature that could blind sensors, choke engines, and erase the world. Alarms blared across the base. The sleek drones were hastily grounded. Steel shutters slammed down over windows. The calm efficiency of the base began to fray at the edges, replaced by a controlled, high-strung urgency. Inside the command center, the mood was souring. "I've lost visuals from the entire northern perimeter," a technician shouted over the rising howl of the wind outside. "The microwave comms tower is offline. The sheer dust density is blocking the signal." Colonel Madsen stood over the main tactical display, his face a grim mask. The map, usually alive with friendly and neutral contacts, was flickering. Blue icons representing his patrols vanished one by one into a spreading sea of digital static. "Satellite link?" he barked. "Intermittent at best, sir," an officer replied, his voice tight. "The particle density is too high. We're losing bandwidth by the second." The lights in the command center flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into chaos. The emergency generators kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a harsh, red glow, but the main tactical displays remained dark. The sophisticated, billion-dollar nervous system of the base had been deafened and blinded by a cloud of sand. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep into the room. Young officers, weaned on flawless technology, stared at their dead screens, their faces pale. They were flying blind. Through it all, Anya Sharma, who had made her way to the back of the room when the alarms first sounded, remained perfectly still. She watched the unfolding failure not with surprise, but with a kind of detached confirmation. She had seen it before. She knew the fatal arrogance of relying on technology that could be defeated by something as primitive as dirt. Her calm was an island in the churning sea of anxiety, and it went completely unnoticed. The command center was a cacophony of frustrated shouts and the crackle of failing short-range radios. "I can't raise patrol, Delta." Their last known position was grid 7-1, but the map is dead. Madsen slammed his fist on a console. "Damn it, give me something. Anything." The red emergency lighting made everyone look like demons in a technological hell of their own making. In the midst of the chaos, Anya turned and walked out of the room. No one saw her go. Her movement was silent, economical, a ghost slipping through a wall of noise. She walked with purpose against the wind that now tore at the buildings, the air so thick with sand it was like moving through water. She headed directly for the hangar at the edge of the tarmac, the one that housed the forgotten Stratoliner. Lieutenant Kalen, tasked with a futile attempt to reboot a dead comm server, saw her pass a window. He saw where she was going. On a pure, inexplicable impulse, he abandoned his post and followed, driven by a curiosity that outweighed his fear of the colonel's wrath. He found her inside the cockpit of the Ghost. The wind howled outside, but inside the old plane, it was strangely quiet. Anya wasn't panicking. She wasn't even rushing. She was working. With methodical grace, she had pulled a panel from the ceiling, revealing a tangle of thick, analog wires and vacuum tubes. She moved with the unthinking precision of a master craftsman. Her fingers danced across dusty dials and switches on the central console, flipping them in a sequence that seemed arcane, ritualistic. There was a low hum, then a pop, and a single, dim amber light flickered to life on a radio set that looked like it belonged in a museum. She picked up the heavy Bakelite handset, blew a cloud of dust from the microphone, and began to tune a large, weighted dial. A wave of static hissed from the speaker, raw and powerful. It wasn't the clean, sterile silence of a dead digital link. It was the sound of the world, angry and alive. Kalen stood in the doorway, mesmerized. He was watching something he didn't understand. She wasn't just turning on a radio. She was communing with the machine, waking a sleeping giant. Kalen watched, frozen, as Anya worked. She wasn't just flipping switches, she was listening. Her head was cocked slightly, her eyes closed, as if she could hear something within the roaring static that he couldn't. She would make a minute adjustment to a dial, listen, then adjust another. It was a conversation. "What are you doing?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper against the storm. Anya didn't look up. "The HF bands are noisy," she said, her voice calm and focused. "But they're not blocked. The signal will bounce off the ionosphere. It's messy, but it gets through." She muttered something under her breath, a string of numbers and letters. Kalen realized it was a checklist, recited from a memory forged decades ago. Auxiliary power routed. Antenna array B selected. Preamp gained to 7. Squelch open. He stepped closer, peering at the ancient equipment. "None of this is on the network. The base won't even know it's active. The base doesn't need to know," she replied, her fingers still moving. "The people in the storm do." A new voice, crackling and faint, broke through the static. It was barely intelligible, a human whisper buried under an avalanche of noise. "Kilo 7. This is Delta. We are blind. Repeat. Coordinates unknown." In the command center, there was only silence. In the cockpit of the Ghost, there was a thread of hope. Kalen looked from the radio to Anya's face. The impassive mask was gone. In its place was a look of absolute, diamond-hard concentration. The woman he and everyone else had dismissed as a clerk was now the only person on the entire base who was actually doing her job. He backed away slowly and jogged back toward the command center, his mind racing. He found a fellow lieutenant trying to coax a signal out of a dead satellite phone. "You won't believe this," Kalen said, breathless. "The liaison, Sharma. She's in the old Stratoliner. She's got a radio working, an old HF set. I think she's talking to Delta." The other officer stared at him blankly. "The paper pusher?" "In the Ghost. Are you sure? That thing hasn't had power in 20 years, I'm sure, Kalen said, a new, dawning respect in his voice. I saw it. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was like she was born in that cockpit. The perception had begun to shift, not like a landslide, but like a single, critical stone coming loose. The news rippled through the frantic command center like a shockwave. Kalen's report reached a senior NCO, who, out of sheer desperation, related to Colonel Madsen. Madsen, his face streaked with sweat and grime, looked at Kalen as if he'd lost his mind. The liaison? In the C-137? That's impossible, sir. I swear it, Kalen insisted. I heard Delta Patrol's call. It was faint, but it was their desperation was a powerful motivator. With every piece of his advanced technology rendered useless, Madsen was left with only one absurd option. He grabbed a handheld radio, the one channel still working for short-range base comms, and followed Kalen at a run, battling the wind and sand back to the hangar. He arrived, breathless, to see Anya in the cockpit, the handset pressed to her ear. The crackle of the radio filled the small space. "Delta, this is Nightingale," Anya said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the static with practiced authority. She had chosen a call sign that meant nothing to anyone on the base, a ghost name from a ghost past. "I read you faint but clear. Describe your last visual landmark." A distorted voice came back. "Negative landmarks. Just the storm. Compass is spinning. GPS is dead." The patrol was lost, completely disoriented. Madsen watched, his skepticism warring with the undeniable reality of the voice on the radio. Anya didn't look at a map. She didn't need to. "Listen to the wind, Delta," she commanded. "The storm is coming from the northwest. The sound is your compass. Turn your vehicle so the wind is hitting your left side. You will now be facing southwest. Our base is at 10 o'clock. Can you confirm?" There was a pause filled with static. Then confirmed. "Wind is on our left. Good," Anya said. "Now look for the light. I'm going to give you a signal. It won't be bright. Look for a rhythmic pulse." She reached over to another panel, one even older than the radio, and flipped a single, heavy-duty switch. On the tail of the old Stratoliner, a powerful, long-forgotten landing light, designed to cut through the thickest fog, flickered to life. It began to pulse, a slow, steady heartbeat of light cutting a faint, hazy path through the swirling wall of sand. It was low-tech, brute force, and utterly brilliant. Madsen stared, dumbfounded. He, with all his tactical displays and satellite uplinks, was blind. This woman, with a museum piece and an innate understanding of the physical world, had just created a lighthouse in the middle of a hurricane. He listened as she calmly, patiently, talked the patrol home, using the wind as a guide and the pulsing light as a beacon. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a master navigator, her mind a map the storm could not erase. An hour later, the battered patrol vehicle rolled through the main gate, guided home by a ghost light and a ghost voice. The storm began to recede as dawn approached, its fury spent, leaving behind a world scoured clean and eerily silent. The base's systems slowly came back online. The first order Colonel Madsen gave was not to debrief the patrol, but to run a full, deep-level security check on Anya Sharma. "I want to know who she is," he growled to his executive officer. "Scrub the redacted file. Use my credentials. Use Priority 7 clearance. I want to know everything." As the system rebooted, a new protocol flashed across the screens. A post-event security sweep. It was standard procedure after a communications blackout. All personnel were to report to the main briefing hall with their gear for inspection. It was a tedious, bureaucratic exercise, but it was mandatory. Anya arrived with her single duffel bag, her face once again an impassive mask. The soldiers and officers in the room gave her a wide berth. Whispers followed her. The woman from the ghost. The voice on the radio. She was no longer invisible. She was an enigma. They lined up, emptying their bags onto tables for inspection by security personnel. It was routine, impersonal. Anya unzipped her duffel. Inside was the usual assortment of spare clothes, toiletries, a book. And, at the very bottom, wrapped in a simple piece of worn cloth, was a small, heavy object. She placed it on the table without ceremony. The security guard, a young airman, picked it up. He frowned, not recognizing it. It was a medal, but not one he had ever seen. It was made of a dull, dark, non-reflective metal, almost black. It was shaped like a stark, eight-pointed star. In its center, there was no eagle, no shield, no patriotic symbol. There was only a stylized silhouette of keyhole. Colonel Madsen was overseeing the process, his eyes scanning the room. He saw the object in the guard's hand and froze. His blood ran cold. He had seen that medal only once before in his life, 20 years ago, in a top-secret briefing for a program so classified that all records of it were supposedly destroyed. Project Nightingale, a deep-cover unit that operated beyond all treaties, beyond all laws, tasked with missions that officially never happened. Its operatives were ghosts, their identities erased, their existence denied. The medal was the Spectre Cross, awarded only once, posthumously, to the sole survivor of a mission that had saved half a continent at the cost of the entire unit. A mission from which no one was supposed to have returned. Madsen walked slowly toward the table, his legs feeling heavy, his gaze locked on the piece of dark metal. He looked from metal to Anya's calm, quiet face. The liaison, the records keeper, the woman who knew how to use the wind as a compass, the pilot of a ghost plane, the sole recipient of the Spectre Cross. It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. The file on a screen back in his office finally loaded. Her real name wasn't even Sharma. Her entire identity was a fabrication, a legend created to bury the woman who had once been the operative known only as Echo. The air in the briefing hall grew thick and silent. The routine clatter of equipment and board chatter died away as everyone felt the sudden, profound shift in gravity centered on Anya's table. The young airman holding the Spectre Cross looked up at his colonel's pale, shocked face and knew he was holding something sacred and terrifying. Madsen stood before Anya, the cacophony of the last few hours replaced by a deafening internal silence. He saw her now, not the mousy clerk, but the warrior she had been hiding in plain sight. He saw the discipline in her posture not as meekness, but as iron control. He saw the silence not as an absence of words, but as the profound weight of all the things she could never say. The other soldiers and officers watched, their expressions morphing from curiosity to confusion, and then, as they saw the look on their commander's face, to awe. They didn't know what the medal was, but they knew it had broken a man like Colonel Madsen. Madsen looked at Anya, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible respect. He was the commander of a high-tech outpost, a king in his small kingdom, yet he was standing before royalty of a different, more dangerous kind. He saw the faint, geometric tattoo on her wrist and understood it for what it was, not a decoration but a brand. The mark of a ghost. Slowly, stiffly, he brought his hand up in a salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture he gave his lieutenants. It was a salute of profound deference, sharp, precise, and held with an intensity that made the air crackle. It was an apology. It was an act of veneration. The entire room, following their commander's lead, snapped to attention. The sound of 200 boots clicking together was a single, sharp thunderclap. They stood, ramrod straight, a silent honor guard for the woman they had dismissed. They were saluting a legend they had not even known existed among them. Anya looked at Madsen, then at the sea of faces staring at her with newfound reverence. Her expression did not change. There was no flicker of pride, no hint of triumph. She had not sought this. She had not wanted it. She simply met the colonel's gaze, held it for a beat, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an acceptance of their praise. It was an acknowledgement of a secret shared, a burden now seen. Then, with the same quiet efficiency she did everything else, she wrapped the Spectre Cross in its cloth and placed it back in her bag. The next morning, the sun rose on a changed world. The air was clean, the sky a deep, pristine blue. The damage from the storm was being repaired with a renewed sense of purpose. Colonel Madsen had issued a single order regarding Anya. She is to be given unrestricted access to all facilities and personnel. Her authority is second only to mine. Is that understood? The message was clear. The ghost was now a queen. Anya was not in the command center or her quarters. She was where she had been the day before, in the hangar with the C-137 Stratoliner. The hangar doors were open, and sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air around the old plane. She was running a diagnostic on the number 3 engine, her hands covered in grease, a technical manual she had found in a rusted locker open beside her. Lieutenant Kalen approached her, not with the hesitant uncertainty of before, but with a quiet respect. He didn't speak. He simply held out a heavy-duty toolkit. "Thought she might need a proper tune-up, ma'am," he said, the word ma'am carrying all the weight of his new understanding. Anya looked at the toolkit, then at his earnest face. She took it from him with a small, grateful nod. It was a simple gesture, but it was a bridge built between two worlds. She went back to her work, and Kalen stood by, ready to pass her a wrench or simply to learn by watching. He didn't ask about the medal. He didn't ask about Project Nightingale or the name Echo. He understood that respect, true respect, was not about knowing someone's secrets, but about honoring their silence. The final image was of her, sleeves rolled up, leaning into the heart of the old machine, the two of them, the forgotten woman and the forgotten plane, working together in the quiet morning light. The geometric tattoo on her wrist seemed to catch the sun, a silent, complex symbol of a life lived in the shadows, now finally quietly seen. The old engine gave a cough, then another, and settled into a low, powerful hum. It was the sound of silent strength, honored at last, not by words or ceremonies, but by the quiet dignity of earned recognition.